internet. Today I'm going to be doing my second diversity bingo check-in of the year. If you haven't seen my first video, I will link it down below. But basically, I'm participating in a reading challenge this year called Diversity Bingo 2017. There is a bingo board that has a lot of different diverse topics on it, and I am personally trying to get a blackout by the end of the year. There's 36 different squares, and instead of doing a TBR for Diversity Bingo, I've just been kind of seeing what I read as I go and what I want to read for each topic. So instead of doing a TBR like a lot of people did, I decided to do quarterly check-ins. So every 3 months I'll film a video like this and talk about the books that I read during that 3-month span that worked for Diversity Bingo. So I did one back in March, and these are going to be the books that I have read since then for the months of April, May, and June. So I'm going to go down each row vertically and talk about what that book was, what I rated it, when I read it, and kind of give you a brief synopsis. So for the first row, I actually haven't read any new ones that count towards that one, but for the second row I read a book with a main character on the ace spectrum that was Own Voices, and the book I read for that was Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. I ended up giving this book 5 out of 5 stars, and I read it back in June. This book is a very short book, but a very fantastic book. It's kind of about kids who go to different portal worlds, so like Narnia, Wonderland, places like that, and they come back to the real world and they have a hard time coping, and so they go to this school or home, kind of both, kind of help them deal with their problems, and it's also a murder mystery. But the main character in this book is asexual, and it is an Own Voices representation, and I thought it was a fantastic book in terms of plot, in terms of writing style, in terms of diversity. There are a lot of other diverse elements to this book. We have another main character that's trans, and we have a lot of different characters of different ethnicities, and overall it was just a fantastic book. Also in the second row, for diverse nonfiction, I read Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and this is a collection of poetry. I read this back in April, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I liked this poetry collection, but I just didn't connect with it as much as some of the other poetry collections I've read. I think this is one that I'll appreciate more once I'm a little bit older and I get a little more experience just in life in general. But I still enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And that's it for the second row. Moving on to the third row, for a sci-fi fantasy with a disabled main character, I read Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, which is the second book in the Six of Crows duology. And this book follows a lot of different main characters, but one of them is disabled, and it's an Own Voices representation of that particular disability. These 2 fantasy books are some of my favorite fantasy books of all time. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved Crooked Kingdom, and I read it back in May. Moving on to the fourth row, for a practicing Jewish main character, I read The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli, which actually ended up being one of my favorite books so far this year. Crooked Kingdom also was one of my favorite books so far this year. I read this back in May and gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. This book is awesome. It follows a girl named Molly. Her family is Jewish, and Molly has had a lot of unrequited crushes, and she's never really done anything about it. And then when her twin sister Cassie gets a new girlfriend, things kind of start to change for Molly as well, and she kind of starts wanting something more like her sister Cassie has. So her sister is gay. They're both raised by 2 moms, one of which is gay and one of which is bisexual, and the moms are also interracial, which is cool. But it had a lot of really great diverse elements. Also, Molly suffers from anxiety, which is an Own Voices account of anxiety, and I just really loved this book. It was near and dear to my heart, and I related to Molly in a lot of different ways. So I loved this. Highly recommend. And it works for a lot of different bingo squares. That's just the one I chose to make it count towards. But it would also work for a main character with an underrepresented body, which is in the first row, because Molly identifies as fat. Also in the fourth row, for a book by an author of color, I read Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. This one's pretty popular on BookTube, especially lately with the movie that came out in May that I didn't get to see. I read this back in May, and I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. We follow our main character, Maddie, who has a disease where she's basically allergic to everything, so she's kind of shut up in her house a lot, and she kind of entertains herself with what's around her, including neighbors. And these new neighbors move next door, and one of them is a boy about her age, and they kind of start to connect online, and it was just a really cute book. It's not really the kind of book where the girl's sick and the boy saves her kind of thing. It is, but it isn't. It's hard to explain unless you've read it. I thought it was really good. I definitely see the problems people have with it, especially as far as mental illness is concerned, but I still really enjoyed it. And Nicola Yoon is an African-American author, and I believe she grew up in Jamaica, so that's why I counted it for that particular square. Moving on to the fifth row for a biracial main character, own voices, I read Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. And this is another book that I really enjoyed. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and I read it back in April. This book is about a girl named Emmy who is interested in the film industry, and she ends up getting a crush on this girl that she comes in contact with. Emmy is bisexual as well as being biracial, and it's a cute story. It's just adorable, and I love it, and it's one of my favorite contemporaries now, and I loved it. Did I mention that? Also in the fifth row for an immigrant or refugee main character, I read Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is an adult novel, and we follow two main characters who are both from Nigeria who immigrate to different places. One of them immigrates to the United States and one of them immigrates to the UK, and we follow both of them throughout several years of time. I really liked this book. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I read it back in June. And last but not least, in the sixth row for a main character with chronic pain, I read Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Now this was a reread for me, but I went ahead and counted it towards Diversity Bingo anyway because I did read it this year. But this is the first book in the Six of Crows duology, whereas Crooked Kingdom, which I mentioned earlier, is the second book, and I love both of them so much. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars as well because it's one of my favorite fantasy books. And this book is kind of about 6 main characters who are trying to pull off this like really ridiculous and difficult heist, and I love these characters a lot, and I counted this one for it for the same character that has the disability, which involves chronic pain, and the author suffers a similar disability with chronic pain. And you can tell that whenever that character has his narratives, it comes from a very honest place. But I love this book. I love these books. I love this duology, and highly recommend. I reread this back in April, and like I said, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So I have now read 17 books towards the 36 that I need to read by the end of the year, which is almost halfway. I'm just shy one book of being halfway, which is pretty good. In my first checkup video that I did, I also asked for some recommendations for other squares. So I'm going to do that again. So if you have any recommendations for a book set in Central America, a pansexual main character, own voices, an indigenous main character, own voices, or a non-Western real-world setting, that would be awesome. I would love to hear them, and really just diverse book recommendations in general. Leave those in the comments below. Also, let me know in the comments if you're participating in Diversity Bingo 2017 as well. And that will be it for this video, and I will see you guys next time with another video. Bye.